Welcome back once again. I know why you're here. You like obscure games, don't you? You want to play something very few have heard of. Perhaps something even a little strange. Or maybe you saw this and came crawling to the sweet embrace of indie games, begging for something unique, for something interesting, for something fun. Well, have I got some games for you, all but one of which were, in fact, recommendations from you guys. And I have to say, for games that all have under 100 reviews, they're pretty damn good. From a black metal monster collector, to solving the mysteries of a strange plague, and a great quest filled with torture and anguish. Without further ado, let's crawl into the first game. Gloamvault is a roguelike dungeon crawler about beating your enemies to the brink of death, then giving them the choice of either dying where they stand or joining you to fight against their own. What you don't tell them is that unless they are a particularly unique specimen, they will simply be used for ethically dubious magical experiments, or be sacrificed to restore the health of something far superior to them. But this is perfectly justified, as they are monsters, and definitely don't experience any pain or suffering. Now, if you're a person of culture and distinguished taste, you will already have noticed that this game uses the 32 by 32 tiles from a funny little game called Dungeon Crawl Stone Soup, which I did not know was on Open Game Art, and begs the question, where are more games that use this tile set? If you haven't played Dungeon Crawl, then this won't really mean anything to you, so just enjoy the expertly crafted works of art. But to the 3 people that have pledged their life to finding the orb, let me tell you, it is very cathartic to enslave the very beings that are responsible for ending so many of your runs, and forcing them to do your bidding. The actual crawling of the dungeon is very old school, as you can probably tell. Though if you're not a fan of traversing in 3D, it does have an optional 2D mode. Although personally, I prefer the intended 3D way of playing, as this way, if I'm not paying attention, I can be jump scared by whatever accursed creature is stood just around the corner, and in the process be given PTSD of losing a 3.5 hour Stone Soup run. Now, before I continue, I will let you know that as of recording, this game has no release date, but it did seem quite polished and fleshed out, so it might not be too long before a demo or early access. So how do you go about winning this game? Or at the very least, getting a good score on the leaderboard? I actually haven't beat the game yet. Well, after you learn the basics, you're presented with the starting menu. Here, you are given a random selection of monsters, with random stats and abilities. You are also given one customizable monster, that you can give whatever stats and abilities you want or need, within a certain power level. You can re-roll both of these as many times as you like, so you can start the game with whatever you've been given, or min-max your party stats right out of the gate. Although keep in mind that these monsters are roughly the same as those in the first level, so you won't get very far without the use of the game's core mechanic. The mechanic in question being the act of charming wounded creatures and performing the genetically modifying procedure of forcing one monster to be magically fused into another, in the process increasing the stats of one while having the chance to inherit the traits of the one that is lost. Don't worry though, this process, unlike what has to be done first, is completely painless, and definitely does not result in any body-altering mutations of the creature, caused by repeated fusions of different gene pools that probably shouldn't be mixed. Now, a strategy that I used on some of my best runs was loosely based on Meet the Medic, a short cinematic of the character Medic from the hit game Team Fortress 2, released in 2007, where I would make one of my monsters incredibly tanky by squashing whatever worthless creatures I happened to charm into them, really just throwing anything I didn't need into a big mixing pot of tooth, claw and membrane. Then I'd have a monster capable of healing in the next slot down. Now, because the combat works from left to right, the monster that I had turned into a semi-living brick wall would eat all the damage, only to be healed every turn by the medic, allowing me to build up the rest of my party with more specialised units, like ones that have the sole purpose of summoning more low-level creatures for me to meld into the ball of tumours in front. Although you're going to want to make sure that you have plenty of outgoing damage, especially if the thing you have in front was one of your starting monsters, as its damage won't scale all that well. So trying to charm something with better stats to fill out the rest of your slots is worth doing. Though one way or another, you are likely to eventually lose this mushy wall of flesh as you get into the harder levels. But early on, I found this tactic to work quite well. And I don't mean to brag, but the leaderboards clearly show that I am number 1 in the world. So this is objectively the best way of playing. One last tip, however, In combat itself, you have been told by the tutorial to press the big green button to end your turn and allow the monsters to attack. However, a much easier and more beneficial way to do the exact same thing is to simply press 1 on any of the enemies. Most of the time, it will do the exact same thing as pressing the end turn button, but sometimes, if you're lucky, you'll grab yourself a full health monster, in the process giving you one less to worry about in the current fight. There are plenty of ways to go about getting a good run and possibly beating this game. There are quite a few upgrades, spells and items to experiment with, and it does get pretty damn difficult the further you go into the dungeon. I don't really have anything bad to say about this game, although a small quality of life feature I'd like to see added is that when you discover a point of interest, it stays marked on your map. At the moment, they only show up when they're in your line of sight, and for the later levels, or at least the furthest I got, it made it somewhat hard to find the exit. But other than that, I like the choice of art, the turn-based gameplay was very enjoyable, and it was difficult enough to pose quite a challenge, but also be rewarding. Now, from the depths of a dungeon, we travel to the streets of a great city, overrun with a mysterious plague. Plauge of Yamorn is a short metroidvania adventure about a doctor being tasked to investigate, yep, you guessed it, a plague. In Yamorn, that's the name of the city. Now, in my eyes, this game does not portray a story of triumph or victory as you go about cleansing the city, but rather it is one of jealousy and spite. Look at it like this. The city gets overrun by a plague that turns everyone, for lack of a better term, into zombies, and some into what anyone not infected would call mutated abominations. But you see, until your arrival, there is no one here that isn't infected, meaning these beings, in their new form, rest dormant, sealed within the city walls without any disturbance, probably quite peacefully. Until we show up and immediately start beating anyone and anything to death with an iron-topped staff. I don't know about you, but I sure as hell would greet this behaviour with the very same hostility as the creatures that once rested here undisturbed. Another thing, without spoiling of course, is that we acquire almost superhuman abilities not too long after entering the city. This isn't to say some of the creatures don't possess similar properties, but we are clearly, to put it simply, far superior. So, maybe we're the bad guy here. Maybe the city should have stayed sealed, and those inside left to rest. I mean, there was no sign of them wanting to get out, and personally, if I gained the ability to fly and wield magic, I'd think I was doing pretty well for myself. Okay, enough of the ramble. Time for the gameplay. It plays just like any other Metroidvania. Nothing too flashy. The combat I found was quite basic. You have one move and you'll be using it 90% of the time. The other 10% consists of using any consumables you find, health potions, bombs and whatnot. There is a charge attack that you unlock later into the game, but I didn't use this once in combat, given the fact that you have to charge it up. Then again, it's not given to you for this, but for something else, which I'm not going to spoil. Now, you do get a variety of weapons to unlock. However, I skipped the logical progression and crafted the crystal staff about halfway through the game, which was a challenge in and of itself, and then after acquiring this weapon, it gave me a pretty hefty damage boost, making the rest of the game a matter of going around and completing each area without too much trouble. Looking back on it, I don't actually know why I did this. The only thing to best the crystal staff is acquired pretty close to the end of the game, but to be honest, the damage increase isn't that much. You do actually need the other staves to unlock various secrets, and I'm pretty sure that leads to an alternate ending, so if you wish to 100% the game, I recommend just following the natural progression of the gear. And lastly, of course, there is a selection of skills to invest points into. Not much to say here, just your usual damage and health boosts, with a few unique abilities to spice things up. Now, it may sound like I'm bashing on the game, and while, yes, it's not the best Metroidvania game money can buy, I still enjoyed it quite a bit. I am a huge fan of the art style, and the gameplay, despite its simplicity, was still very fun. If I said much more, I would be going into spoiler territory, and a big part of my enjoyment from this game was uncovering the events of Yamorn and the mysterious nature of the plague. So I say go in with as little knowledge as possible and discover things for yourself. It's very much worth it. Now, on the theme of quests, we shall now embark on one of evil crocodiles and incredibly punishing platforming. Mibibli's Quest is an action platformer drowned in a very retro style, akin to games that used to run on the grey box era of consoles. Now, its seemingly innocent portrayal may have you think that this game would just be some light-hearted fun. But what you don't realise until you start playing, or just read the Steam page, You know, now that I think about it, this might just be a lesson in seeing what you're getting into before getting into it. But this is one of those games that, unless you practice meditation like a goddamn Tibetan monk, will make you unfathomably angry with little to no effort. To sum this game up in just one word, it would be unnecessary. Why is there a huge, ribbed object in the way, and why do I need to beat it in order to progress? Not to mention, it would drag you down to the depths of hell upon the slightest touch. And this is only the start of the level. I tried so hard to play this game on the true, intended Mibibli difficulty, but what felt like 7 long hours of trial and error was actually just 15 minutes of well-choreographed psychological torture. This game is difficult, but despite its difficulty, it had me coming back for more once I caved and bumped the level of anguish down to a more tolerable level. You play as Mibibli. I don't know what creature or being Mibibli is supposed to be, but regardless, you're on a quest to save the world. Because, of course you are. Grey box era, remember. And I can only assume, as I have yet to complete the game, that the world is considered saved after you defeat your arch enemy, Crocodibli, Jesus Christ, who is introduced just after the first level, with a certified banger of a track playing while you commence your first duel. Which doesn't go anywhere because you, quote, get bored and part ways. Then you take a trip through several different dimensions, and for some reason this includes Great Britain. A grand title sequence is played out, and you're back where we left off, the hub for the first 4 levels. I'm not going to go over each level here, as, well, it would take far too long, and they're best experienced firsthand, in all their torturous glory. But the ones that I did complete were very well crafted, albeit very difficult. And there's even a boss at the end of each one. I can't say much more about the game, but all in all, it was a very well made platformer, with a very surreal and retro theme to it, that I enjoyed very much. If you're into these kind of games, although, I mean, who doesn't love a good platformer, then I say it's worth checking out. Yawnoc is a pretty run-of-the-mill roguelite, albeit a lesser known one, but with a mechanic I don't think I've seen in a game before. You see, everything else about the game is pretty standard. You have meta progression, temporary upgrades in a between-round shop, and a light story to tie things together. But in my opinion, the main draw of this game comes from the enemies, as they are bound by the rules of Conway's Game of Life. Now, you've probably heard of this, and you may even be familiar with the rules of Game of Life, but even if you don't, and just know of the chaotic nature of the 2D cellular automaton, you can probably see why I was intrigued. I do have a bit of a gripe with roguelites in general, purely due to how many there are nowadays. But it was a breath of fresh air to experience this game's unique enemy design, based off something that I don't think I've seen implemented into a game before. It makes fighting off the robot invasion very unpredictable. Well, if you know the rules of the Game of Life, the enemies in the early levels are pretty easily predicted. But even if you don't know the rule set, the later levels of this game get pretty hectic. There was a point on one stage where there was a relatively small cluster of artillery slinging bots that didn't pose much of a threat to begin with, but I either failed to take them out in time, or just shot the wrong one, and it immediately set off a chain reaction, resulting in me getting brutally carpet bombed. You'll find this happens a lot in this game. A relatively harmless looking group of enemies can easily morph into a mechanical nightmare, either by your own doing, or by their intended placement. As far as the rest of the game goes, like I said, it's a pretty standard roguelite. Nothing really stood out to me, good or bad, and I would say it's all around very well put together. There are perhaps some minor balancing issues. The pistol's weapon ability I found was very strong early on, but did get outclassed by other weapons later into the game, which it should, given it's only a starting weapon. But other than that, my first few hours of the game were flawless, and if you're a fan of roguelites, this game would make a great addition to your collection. I hope you enjoyed this collection of obscure games. Now, to the 3 people that are actually still here at the end, I'm probably not going to put out another one of these for a little while. I know, these are some of my best performing videos, and you guys seem to enjoy them a lot, but to be honest, I'm kind of burnt out with doing the same format. Sure, I know I've only done 4 of them, but with the time it takes to make these, it gets pretty repetitive. Now, don't worry, the content won't switch up too much. I want to do more deep dives into individual games, and maybe some more stuff like my roguelikes essay. And this isn't to say the series won't stop completely. I'll probably start it up again once I get the motivation to. Anyway, stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video, whatever that may be. Bye bye.